From bagging in fights with MMA legends because of his clout, to blatantly claiming that he'll quit boxing if he loses to Nate Diaz, here's the real reason why Jake Paul will only ever be a YouTuber. For all you Jake Paulers going, oh come on, ask yourself, would he really be competing at the top level if it weren't because he's Jake Paul? When YouTube boxing came around, it proved that you don't really need to be the best fighter in the world to get into those pay-per-view buys. Influencers just transitioned their fans over to the sport, where they would spend thousands of dollars just to see them put on the gloves. As more and more boxers began to accept this reality and Jake Paul's fights started bringing in those pay-per-view buys, the Ohio-born star slowly became the hottest fighter in the world. If you talk numbers alone, there isn't anyone bigger than the problem child. Well-known fighters began calling the ex-vlogger out. We're talking Chris Eubank Jr., Henry Cejudo, and Colby Covington. For these big names, Jake became a case of low-stakes, high-reward. The problem child's fight with Ben Askren allegedly clocked in 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. Just to put it into perspective, only 800,000 people saw Wilder vs. Fury 2. A new algorithm was set in the sport of boxing, and it worked. From then on out, we saw the likes of Tyrone Woodley and Anderson Silva answer Jake's call. You see, had it been one of your salt poppies who, one can make the case, is leagues ahead of both KSI and Jake combined, it's hard to say any of them would have batted an eye. That's just the sad reality of boxing. If it makes money, it makes sense. Jake brings in those dollar bills. But what about his boxing ability? His best performances have been against Tyrone Woodley, Anderson Silva, and Ben Askren. All these three fighters have two things in common. One, they are way past their primes. And two, they are UFC legends. The keyword here is UFC. People criticized Jake for boasting an undefeated streak that didn't even have an actual boxer in it. And when the stars finally aligned and Tommy Fury vs. Jake Paul was set for Saudi Arabia, every boxing purist had a smile on their face. They knew Jake was about to be exposed, and boy were they right. Tommy Fury put up a clinic against Paul and won via split decision, which should have been unanimous. In terms of boxing ability, from effective jabs, form, and overall conditioning, it wasn't even close. KSI had been calling Jake Paul a fraud since the very beginning. And after the Tommy Fury fight, it all started to make sense. And Jake's rather private explanation for losing the fight really didn't help either. Paddy the Batty Pimblett was straight vented, saying Jake Paul was worse than he had thought. Okay, that's a bit harsh. Before the fight, boxing promoter Eddie Hearn was slightly less critical, but called the problem child average at best. And after the fight, he straight up advised him to stay away from a rematch. After losing to Fury, it was the perfect time to keep up the momentum and go for another real boxer. And boom, Paul vs. Nate Diaz shows up on Instagram. This is the perfect example of why Paul will always be of the YouTubers what gets views mindset. Even after getting a big reality check fighting a real boxer, Jake still chose the next fight that was going to fill up the stadiums. It's all about clout with him. And what's worse, it's actually working. People have no problem spending $3,500 a piece to fill up the stadium months before it actually takes place. A more sensible next opponent would have been Salt Poppy, adored by the box tubing community and actually moves like a real pugilist. Heck, even Eddie Hearn proposed he go pro. Don't get me wrong, Nate's reputation precedes him. He can still brawl, and apparently choke out a Logan Paul lookalike on the street. But then again, Diaz is way past his prime at 38 years old, with his last MMA fight taking place in September of 2022. While all the lukewarms were celebrating the fight announcement on Twitter, UFC middleweight Sean Strickland didn't hold back from venting his frustrations with the matchup. He called it a joke that a retired 155-pounder is going 8 rounds against a juiced TikToker at 185. He even highlighted the fact that Tommy Fury is someone who is regarded as a recreational boxer in the community. And of course, Dana White was going to jump on the bandwagon too. When speaking on the Jim Rome show, he basically summed up the title of this video, saying even though he's trying his best not to criticize the bout, but it's ridiculous that Jake fights Nate for the first time after being humiliated by a genuine boxer. Some people may be into it, but certainly not the UFC boss. There's a pattern with Jake. He'll cherry-pick the names he wants to fight in terms of their popularity. Conor McGregor is arguably the most popular fighter in both MMA and boxing, period. The man is loaded with over 50 million followers. And of course, he was a name that hasn't stayed out of Jake's mouth throughout his career. From wearing the Irish flag with a cigar in his hand, dissing his wife in an Instagram video, to straight up expose McGregor and his entanglements caught on video, Jake pretty much did everything he could to make sure he got McGregor's attention. And all he got was Conor mocking him on Twitter, calling him a flop. Okay, Conor's off the list. How about going for Jorge Masvidal? That's right. Here's another huge name in the fight game who is also past his prime. But according to GameBread, even Paul can't afford him. Probably the biggest example of Paul's ambition, or more specifically, his greed, was him calling out the GOAT, Iron Mike Tyson. Come on, Jake, this is getting a little too ridiculous now. And the list goes on. And yes, there is actually a Jake Paul hit list that even includes names from Gervonta Tank Davis, Kamaru Usman, and even his brother, Logan Paul. Okay, it's cool to be ambitious, but I think there is more to it. You see, what made Logan Paul so successful in the YouTube scene was that he basically cracked the algorithm, collaborate with the biggest influencers, and see those numbers pouring in. Jake very well knows even if he loses a match against Conor McGregor, he will still go home with $50 million in the bank, while Conor will be laughed at for bragging about a win against a YouTuber. So, tell me, who actually lost? More than a boxer, Jake is a marketing genius. I mean, this was the man who made millions off his beef with his brother in a diss track war. It's as though everything he does is a calculated tactic to bring in those views and sell merchandise. The biggest display of Jake Paul's YouTube marketing genius was after the gotcha hat incident. You know, the time Jake stole Floyd Mayweather's hat and was chased down by him and his crew until he got a black eye? This is exactly why he's called the problem child. Only Jake would have the guts to provoke a 50-0 boxer like that, knowing well enough that he can get squashed by his huge security guards. But at the end of the altercation, everyone was talking about it. The hashtags were supposed to be all about Logan's matchup against Mayweather, but the hashtag gotcha hat was the talk of the town. Okay, Jake created a scene and got clout. Big deal. Oh, not just that. Within minutes of the altercation, Jake announced some gotcha hat merchandise was going live. Are you kidding me? Everyone knows Floyd can absolutely destroy Jake when it comes to a fight. And he's after Jake's life to this very day for the disrespect. But Jake doesn't mind running. For him, if it got clicks and made money, there really isn't anything to be mad about. Oh, and let's not forget the chaos he caused ringside during Tommy Fury's fight against Raleigh Lambert. Jake was seen shouting some very colorful statements at Tommy Fury, and went as far as sleeping when on commentary. Buffoonery or not, Jake's antics were the talk of the town. But maybe, after the humbling of Tommy Fury, Jake finally sees the truth. During a YouTube video promoting his fight against Nate Diaz, Jake laid down the stakes plain and simple. After claiming he's ever ready to take on the Stockton gangster, he said that if he loses, he will gladly go back to doing YouTube full-time. Jake didn't need to raise the stakes that high. Maybe this wasn't just another marketing tactic. Jake saw how much he needed to work to take out Fury, someone who's ranked number 39 in the official WBC charts. Jake was led on by yes men and the wins that he racked up against fighters who were shells of their former selves. But the moment Tommy Fury's hand was raised as opposed to his, it was game over. This fight against Nate seems like a test for Jake, to not only prove to the world that he is as good as he says he is, but to himself too. So, from blatantly claiming that he will quit boxing after he loses to Nate Diaz, to bagging in fights with MMA legends because of his clout, here's the real reason why Jake Paul will only be a YouTuber.